Syracuse University. And today he'll be talking to us about dismantling the anti-science misinformation machine, bursting bubbles, escaping echo chambers, and bypassing the backfire effect. Dr. Wiles is a biology professor at SU, where he holds appointments in science teaching and earth sciences as well. His research deals mainly with how people learn about and interact with science, and he focuses on issues related to evolutionary biology and climate change education, and on diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM fields. So we're very excited to have him here today, and with that, I will turn it right over to Dr. Wiles.
Oh, wow. Thank you. This is the first time that I have been in a live setting for anything like this since March of last year. Wow. I'm looking over here at the computer monitor for those who are away, and I've got this little blue line that goes up and down to see if you can hear me. So since we're so far away from each other, since I have been fully vaccinated, and since I do have some audio concerns, I am going to go ahead and unmask, but thank you for following the guidelines and masking up yourselves. All right. So there should be projection up here behind me. For those of you who are at home, it is there. So you could see the title, Dismantling the Anti-Science Misinformation Machine. Oh, there it is. Okay. Bursting bubbles. Oh, we're not here to burst anyone's bubble. It's just that sometimes we get in our bubbles and don't hear things from the outside. That's also called an echo chamber. And if we want to get information outside of our circle, we have to get out of our echo chamber. And sometimes when that happens, we're presented with information that's counter to what we already thought. And sometimes we tend to dig in a little bit. That's called the backfire effect, when you resist new information that's being presented. It's good to be a skeptic, absolutely. But when we're communicating about science, which we're here to talk about today, that backfire effect is really important. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself because they introduced me as Dr. Jason R. Wiles. Oh, yes, okay. Lots of people have doctor in front of their names. It doesn't mean they know anything about what they're talking about. I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of background about myself just so you know where I'm coming from. I have not always been Dr. Jason R. Wiles. I've not always been a professor at Syracuse University. In fact, I started in a very different place. Syracuse is a great place to be, but it's very different from Arkansas. I grew up in a very rural area in Arkansas. The stork that you see up there is delivering me. You can tell it's me. I still have same hair, everything, you know. It's delivering me to Jonesboro, Arkansas, which is where I was born, but not really where I was raised. It's just the closest place to where my parents lived that had a hospital. So imagine my mom in labor being driven an hour from the place where I was raised, and that is Ash Flat, Arkansas. Oh, look at me. I actually had hair for a little while. When I was a kid, I really wanted to be on the ocean. You can see me there practicing. Didn't have any oceans around there. I was about 350 million years too late for that. But it didn't stop me from dreaming. I grew up a little bit. I went to high school, like most of you are in middle school, high school. I went to high school. That's my high school, the whole thing. The white peaked roof that you see back there is the whole gym. Right in front of it with that one window is the whole cafeteria. Pretty little place. It's called Highland High School in Hardy, Arkansas. Very small place. My dad was in the first graduating class in 1965 that came from smashing two very small schools together. And people really never left. And they started wondering, what am I going to do? Because they knew I was this weird kid who, my first job was picking up rocks off the farm. And I couldn't just pick them up and put them in the truck and dump them off the hill like I was supposed to do. Every single one of them I wanted to look at and say, oh, wow, look at all the fossils here and the minerals. And I'd go catalog them and, what's the heck's this kid going to do? So they decided they were going to send me off to college. And boy, did they, all the way there. Yeah, I got to go, well, that's actually about 110 miles. Well, really only about 90 as far as the way the crow flies. But down to Harding University, where I earned a bachelor's degree in biology with a minor in Bible. You know, I was kind of sent there because, well, everyone thought that I would come back and be the town doctor, take over for old Doc Tucker, who they called old Doc Tucker at the time, but now he's, ooh, I guess that guy's pushing 90 and still practicing because I never went back. I actually had the whole thing of trying to tell my folks and my family that I really had never wanted to be a medical doctor. But by the time I did that, I had a degree in biology and had to decide to tell them I wasn't going to be a medical doctor or go to med school and not really be happy with that. So I ended up doing what I really wanted to do at the time, and that was to go study at Portland State University, way out in Oregon. Oh my gosh. And how did I tell my parents that I didn't want to come back and take over for Doc Tucker because I wanted to study the foraging ecology of sea otters? Now, that was a tough conversation. I also really liked rocks still, so I went ahead and got another graduate degree at Mississippi State University, go Bulldogs, in earth sciences, geosciences actually. You know, I started teaching at community colleges and things like that. You know, I kept noticing that people really had a hard time understanding biology itself as a unified discipline instead of just a bunch of things to memorize if they didn't have these very big, important, key concepts that underlie the entire discipline to tie everything together. I wanted to know more about that, so I ended up at a place called McGill University, which is a great place to be, and many of you probably haven't heard of it because it's on the other side of an invisible force field called the Canadian border. So I went to McGill to try to learn how to help people understand science better and ended up getting a PhD there. And then from there came to Syracuse University to work in the biology department. I haven't been at Syracuse in person the entire time. This past year has been pretty pandemic-y, and before that I actually spent a year on sabbatical at Harvard in the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Now, just because I have doctor in front of my name and worked at Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics for a long time doesn't mean I know anything about astrophysics. I do not. I was there to work on how people understand science, and they have a really great science education department there. So that's where I was until I came back here, got another year in, and then we went into pandemic. So I'm really, really glad to be here. Thank you for coming out and giving me the opportunity for my comeback tour, I suppose. Wow, you know, I really, after telling you my whole life story, I feel like I need a break. Anybody need a break? Yeah, go ahead, enjoy a nice break. Who's got their cigarettes with you? Yeah, how many smokers we got in here? 7th graders, 12th graders, yeah? No one's raising their hand. Okay, no, I see, yeah, some very emphatic, no way, okay. Yeah, you don't have smoke breaks. You know better than that, right? But it took a long time of people getting through a lot of misinformation that was intentionally put out there to keep people from understanding and knowing about and accepting the science on tobacco smoke. Some of it was very clever. How about this? Even your doctor? What? Now think about what this says here. This is actual advertisements for Camel cigarettes. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Now, does that actually say that doctors say that, you know, smoking Camel cigarettes is probably good for you? No, not really. It just says that more doctors smoke Camels than anything else. I don't know. It doesn't say anything about how many doctors actually smoke or how many of them actually think it's a good thing to do. But those who do smoke, maybe more of them smoke Camels. Okay, but it might give you the impression I'm okay. I'm smoking Camels. That's what doctors smoke. Or nurses, right? Nurses over there in the corner, right? And, you know, oh, I'm worried about my health, but you know what? If I stop smoking, I'm going to just eat everything in sight. I'm going to gain a lot of weight, and that's unhealthy. I better keep smoking, right? Those are actual ads for Lucky Strikes. Oh, what about my teeth? Oh, well, we've got filters on those things. Now, as your dentist, I would recommend Viceroys. What? These are real advertisements. It's part of what's called the tobacco industry playbook. If you ever want to know more about this, there's a really great film called Thank You for Smoking. It's a satirical piece, but it's based on real stuff. And it really does showcase the kinds of media tools that were used by the tobacco industry to sow misinformation in a very, very, very effective way. The Heartland Institute was at the kind of core of that. They're a think tank of people who try to figure out how can we get our messaging out there and sway people to the way that we want things to be. And they really haven't just focused on tobacco. You might be wondering, we're all convinced we're not smoking. Why is he talking about this stuff? Well, it's because that same playbook comes into play when you have other kinds of science that people want to have misinformation about for whatever reason. So remember that name, the Heartland Institute. Check this out. This is news just from a couple weeks ago. CNN Business, Exxon uses big tobacco's playbook to downplay the climate crisis, Harvard study finds. Yeah, people actually study the communication that is being used to communicate to the public. And if you want to actually look at that study, it's open access in the journal One Earth. It's a Cell Press journal. It's a big name journal. And the actual title is Rhetoric and Frame Analysis of ExxonMobil's Climate Change Communications. The highlights: ExxonMobil's public climate change messaging mimics tobacco industry propaganda. That's pretty clear. And if you look at the data from this, which you're welcome to do, it's very clear that that is the case. And it's no wonder, because when you look at what's coming out, going to teachers, this curriculum packet was actually sent around to high school teachers. They didn't ask for it. It was just sent to them, with a title, Why Scientists Disagree About Global Warming, with a whole computer set of things and images and videos to show students, and the feedback form, let us know what you think about this. Yeah. And guess who it came from? If you look up in the corner of the letterhead, the Heartland Institute. The same folks that are responsible for all of that tobacco misinformation and generating that tobacco industry playbook. They're using the same type of tactics to sow misinformation about climate change and other very important areas of public discourse now, right? Luckily, the teachers got this and they said, this looks pretty bogus. And this was, in fact, labeled by the National Center for Science Education as not scientific in any way. And they ran a big anti-misinformation campaign just to help people deal with what to do with this curriculum that you might have found coming into your inbox as a science teacher in school. So yeah, this is actually really part of something called the climate change denial machine. Now, it looks pretty complicated, and it kind of is. There's a lot of parts to it, right? This was first described by Dunlap and McCreight in research from 2011. It's been refined a little since then, but they use the same imagery here to, if you run across the top of it, describe how fossil fuels industry, corporate America, and conservative foundations use conservative think tanks and front groups. They employ astroturf organizations. What is an astroturf organization? Well, maybe you've heard of grassroots, where individuals and citizens band together to get things done. Grassroots organizations. AstroTurf is a fake one of those. So they kind of make up a not real grassroots. We call it AstroTurf organizations, and they all work together to keep people in what's called an echo chamber, where if we can make sure that you only listen to certain media and don't get anything from outside. If you're getting your information from the internet, we're going to have blogs out there that are going to draw your attention in, and we're going to communicate with and through particular politicians and help you only get the information that really supports or toes the line that we want you to get. And that's a problem. Those echo chambers are very, very difficult to penetrate because we tend to be very almost tribal in the kind of media that we consume. So what about those certain politicians? If you listen to the folks that are listed here, you'll find our former president saying things like the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese in order to make the U.S. manufacturing non-competitive. Or I don't think science knows whether humans cause climate change. Or for everybody who thinks the planet is warming, I find somebody who thinks it isn't. Or we don't know how much humans actually contribute to climate change. Or they'll simply bring a snowball from outside into the floor of the Senate, throw it on the ground and say it's cold outside, so climate change can't be real. That's interesting. Wow, that's one way of communicating. And some of these might be a little bit older. Even just recently, though, you might have remembered then Senator Kamala Harris talking to then candidate for Supreme Court Amy Coney Barrett about climate change, and now Justice Barrett made it very clear that she thought that the science on climate change is still debatable. And of course she would, because she was put through the entire system by the Heritage Foundation, another one of these conservative think tanks that is actually endorsed by the Heartland Institute. And they share a platform. It's an app for different media outlets and politicians to get their talking points to be online with the kind of message that they want to send. Interesting way of keeping people in the echo chamber, right? So how do we deal with folks who don't get the message about the science because the science doesn't penetrate the echo chamber by design? How do we do that? All right, well, the first thing we got to think about is what happens when we try. There's something very important called the backfire effect. It's a very well documented psychological behavior, and I've got this cartoon here because the Oatmeal, if you're familiar with the comic, had a really good infographic comic kind of describing it. With the website down below if you want to go check it out. There's a little bit of a not safe for work warning on that. They have updated it with language that I don't necessarily endorse. But it's all real, okay? So the backfire effect is basically when you hear information that is counter to what you currently believe, and instead of thinking, maybe I should think differently, you dig into what you believed before. Now, to one degree, that might be called healthy skepticism. But when you're dealing with something that isn't just a regular little old belief, but instead a core belief, something that is part of your identity, then you have a greater tendency to ignore even a great deal of really good information. So when we're dealing with something that comes up against people's politics or their particular way they were brought up, even though the information might be very good and there might be a lot of it, it might be something that's difficult to get over. So if we've got good information and a lot of it, but no one wants to hear it because it's different from what they currently believe and have thought for a long time, how do we change their minds? You might ask, can we change people's minds? And the answer is yes, but we have to think about how we do that. We need to use some research about how to do that. It's not the same as just providing more evidence, because that's what they're expecting you to do, all right? So we have to think a little bit about the factors that are associated with, if you're talking about climate change, what are factors associated with rejection of climate change? And I do a little bit of research on this myself. Just for working with students on the campus of Syracuse University, we have found that really political affiliation is the only consistent predictor of people's attitudes about climate change. Not how much they know about it, not how much they care about it, but really about political affiliation. That was the only predictor factor we found. Our colleagues, Lewandowski and others, found that it can be related to things like your economic ideas. If you are a laissez-faire capitalist, then you're less likely to accept climate change. If you are more prone to conspiratorial thinking, if you like those conspiracy theories, then you're more likely to reject climate science. If you somehow believe that all of these environmental problems have been solved already, then you don't really care as much about it. And then there's this idea of the perceived consensus. Oh, okay. So those are things we have to think about. we also need to know about the backfire effect itself. And there's actually multiple kinds of backfire effect, right? So there's something called the continued influence effect, where you heard something once, and even though you might have heard later that that was wrong, you still remember that there was something about that. A really good example of that is a long time ago, there was a study, air quote, study, in a major journal that linked vaccinations, early childhood vaccinations, to autism. That is still in the public zeitgeist today, even though that was retracted and retracted and retracted. The person who submitted that really poorly done study lost their medical license over it. The whole thing was retracted. It's not really even supported by the journal that put it out anymore. And many, 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 many studies have been done that refute that original study, but somehow people still cite it. So how do you get over that continued influence? Well, repeated retractions and providing alternative accounts. So all of those studies that show this to not be true, and then also relying on the idea that the diseases these vaccines prevent are far worse than whatever non-existent, non-evidence-based risks related to that there might ever have been, which there are none. And then there's the familiarity backfire effect. All right, good example of this. How many of you have seen your social media feeds coming up with people trying to stick keys and forks and stuff to themselves in the past week or so? Yeah. Oh, some people are laughing. Okay, some people are like, I don't know what that guy's talking about, right? There was a recent event in Ohio at which, in a political arena, someone came out and said that if you get that vaccine for the coronavirus, well, there's a metal component to it, and it works with the 5G waves to magnetize you, and stood up and started putting keys and bobby pins on themselves and saying, why does this stick to my skin? Okay, so I shouldn't have told you that story. A lot of you knew what I was talking about. Some of you have never heard any idea of it, but now you've got the familiarity backfire effect. You're going to go away from here thinking, oh yeah, I heard about that. Oh, I'm familiar with that. And maybe wondering, is that real? I should have given you a pre-exposure warning. I should have told you, now I'm going to tell you something that's really silly, that isn't real, and then maybe you're, oh, I'm ready for this to not be real, instead of telling you about it and you say, oh, what? I haven't heard of this. Oh, okay. Now, I could go into giving you the facts, right? Or I could do what's called the overkill. I could really overkill it. I could start explaining about how much iron you actually have in your body, in your blood right now. Excuse me. 5 liters of blood with all that hemoglobin's got iron attached to all of it, carries the oxygen around your blood. And if you think about how much blood that is compared to the very tiny amount of material that's in that vaccine, even if some of it is metal, you've already got way more than that in your body right now, right? So, I mean, I could go down the road of really explaining how that doesn't work, but I really might just do the job of saying, hey, this guy talked about that for a really long time, and I don't really remember what it was all about, something about metal in your body. Yeah, and now I'm worried about it, right? I overkilled it. So the best thing you could do is give a simple, brief rebuttal. And you know, healthy skepticism is fine, but don't pay more attention to something that is so silly that probably a whole lot of people aren't going to put much stock into it anyway, especially if you're dealing with large numbers of people at a time. But then we've got something a little harder to deal with, something called the worldview backfire effect. Now, this is where we're dealing with those core beliefs. So if you're trying to help people understand something that runs counter to something that's very central to their identity, that might threaten their worldview. They're not going to be able to hear you. So how do you do that? Well, frame the evidence in a worldview affirming manner by endorsing the values of the audience. Oh, how would I do that and be honest? I don't know. I can give you an interesting example that came through my social media feed. It's going to be a lot of words. I'm going to read it to you because it's kind of awesome. All right, so this actually came up as a little meme in my feed. It says, fourth-year med student reporting in, had a rotation with a pediatrician where he ended up in the classic encounter with an anti-vaccination parent. This lady was a conspiracy theory magnet. She casually mentioned everything from 9/11 to chemtrails. Of course, she loved the idea of the vaccine conspiracy as well, opting not to protect her 1-year-old, to stick it to Big Pharma. I relayed all this to my attending after the exam. I would see the patient first, gather the history, do my exam to present my attending physician. He got this sort of lazy smirk on his face that screamed, "Watch this." We go back to the exam room and we cover all the important bits of a well-child encounter: growth charts, behavioral milestones, nutrition, sleep, and then we get to vaccines. She lists approximately 15 reasons why vaccines are more dangerous than the disease they protect against. LOL. If you didn't catch that, they're not more dangerous than the diseases they prevent. In addition to the various evils of the pharmaceutical industry, my attending listens quietly until she's done with her soapbox about one eternity later, and then interjects with, now that was all important, right? Listen, okay, and then interjects with, have you considered the possibility that the anti-vaccine propaganda could be an attempt by the Russians or Chinese to weaken the health of the United States population? In a moment of catastrophic cognitive dissonance, I swear I heard a strange popping noise as her brain misfired. It actually broke her. The allure of the increasingly ridiculous conspiracy theory was just too strong. She ended up agreeing to a modified vaccine schedule. I was flabbergasted. My attending just grinned at me in response. To this day, I'm not sure the medical ethics of the situation are totally palatable, but wow, the result was amazing. All right, so affirm the worldview. Remember, the conspiratorial thinking is an important factor in some of this stuff, right? Affirm the identity. Self-affirmation of the personal values increases receptivity to the evidence. And that's actually been something that we've found in the research that I do. So if I'm going to give you some good advice about how to help people think about, not necessarily to change their minds right now and outright accept what you have to say, but at least be able to think about the science that you've learned about, that you're trying to communicate, I would say one thing you need to do is don't be a jerk, right? Don't make people feel like you're calling them, less intelligent than you. Don't talk down to them. Don't make fun of them. Don't be a jerk. Be more sympathetic that way. Avoid things that you know might trigger the backfire effect, right? If someone is really deeply entrenched, or if they're talking about how big pharma is making money off of this, or Monsanto is evil, then don't come right in there and tell them that they're wrong, right? Come at it from another angle. Start to think about things that they care about too, and talk about how science works. This is a big one, right? If we can get people thinking about how science actually works, then when we start thinking about things that are based on science, we're better able to know what kinds of questions science can ask, what kinds of checks that science has on itself. If people know more about how science works, you can let them figure out the specifics of, some issue that you're talking about later. Don't necessarily expect to change their mind right away. Another thing is that don't use language that might trigger the backfire effect. Really talk about related issues that they do care about, right? So if you're talking to people about GMOs, not that you necessarily want to come out and wholeheartedly endorse GMOs, but just to talk about it, but someone's really resistant to the notion at all. Some of the research that we have done indicates that if you're talking about issues related to world hunger, distribution of food, agriculture, things that people actually care about that don't raise the backfire effect of GMOs, then move into ways that we might be able to solve these problems. If GMOs comes up as a potential solution, at least you can have that conversation based upon shared values of caring about an issue, instead of starting with something that might trigger the backfire effect. And remember to affirm the identity of the individual. Understand what they consider to be evidence and help them to find others with whom they can identify. Find people that they are solid in identification with, who agree with the science, and then they're going to have a lot better time of thinking about it themselves, especially if it's you, right? That's the thing. We've got a lot of high school students in here, middle school students in here. If you're learning science and taking that home, your parents know you. They know you're a good person. They know that you're not trying to turn them against something that they've raised you, that you have in common, that you think about things similarly. And if you have ideas that you're wrestling with or things that you've learned that you want to talk about, they're much more likely to have a good conversation and think about things with you than they are to listen to some scientist they've never met before. It's important to be a good science communicator, whether or not you're a practicing scientist. And that's how we get ourselves out of that echo chamber. All right. So remember also, one of the factors that we had come up with from factors associated with rejection of climate science was perceived consensus. So there's a lot of work that these kind of anti-science misinformation machines do to cast the science as somehow in doubt. So this perceived consensus thing is a pretty important one. So when I think about what people think and how it actually plays out in science, that's an important disparity that you find sometimes. So if I'm thinking about climate scientists, only about 55% of people in the public, people in the public think that only about 55% of climate scientists agree on global warming, when in reality, it's about 97%. That's a big disparity in the public perception versus the way that it is in the scientific community. And I kind of get how that happens, right? So if I'm in a bubble, if I'm in the media bubble, and how things are presented matters. If I look at these two circles, they're both the same size, but I have to look a little bit more closely to see the actual colors of the pie chart. I've got two circles that look about equal. And that's how you see climate science on the news most of the time. There's always some climate denier and a climate science supporter, and it's almost always Bill Nye the Science Guy. Like, seriously, almost always. Like, really, pretty much always, it's Bill Nye and some climate science denier. And you get the idea that, you know, it's 50-50, or maybe even worse than that, that it's just the world versus Bill Nye, right? But that's not the way that it really is. Bill Nye's not by himself. And here we have John Oliver pitting Bill Nye against a climate change denier. But then he decided, you know, maybe we should have a statistically representative debate on climate change. So before that debate began, they brought in two more climate change deniers and 97 climate scientists to give a statistically representative debate, right? Now, this is more like how the media should cover this, I believe, right? Instead of giving the idea that it's a 50-50 split in the scientific community, which is not the case at all. How do we know that it's not, though, right? How do we know that there's a scientific consensus on that? Well, we can look at all of the science, all the papers, all the reports, and add them all up and see what they say. Or we can do surveys of climate scientists, and many people have. These are all some studies that have interviewed climate scientists. We could do a mathematical analysis of citation patterns, right? Those papers that are cited most frequently in scientific studies, what do they say about it? And people have done all of these things, and they come up with about 97%. One of the more famous ones is this meta-analysis where we looked at, the scientific community, it was actually Cook and others, who looked at about 16,000 papers on climate change in peer-reviewed journals. And of those that took a position on anthropogenic global warming, 97.1% of those endorsed that position. If you looked at those that reject or that were uncertain, you could pretty much find where they were funded by entities that had vested interest in anti-science claims. And then you look back at all of those other kinds of ways of figuring out that consensus, and it's all very, there's consilience there. No matter how you do it, you come up with high 90s of percentages of consensus in the scientific community on this thing. But you can also just ask those organizations, the scientific organizations, what they think. So the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says more than half of the observed increase in global average surface temperature from 1951 to 2010 was caused by anthropogenic increase in concentrations in other anthropogenic forcings together, right? AAAS, global climate change is occurring now and is a growing threat to society. American Chemical Society, climate change is real, largely attributable to emissions from human activities, and potentially very serious problem. American Geophysical Union, human-induced climate change requires urgent action. Humanity is the major influence on global climate change observed over the past 50 years. American Medical Association, Earth is undergoing adverse global climate change, and they agree that anthropogenic contributions are significant. American Meteorological Society, the dominant cause of the rapid change in climate over the past half century is human-induced increases in the amount of atmospheric greenhouse gases. Now, these are the organizations of scientists who study this and the impacts of it, right? So the scientific community is in no way ambiguous about this. It's a real problem, right? But still, only about 1 in 7 Americans understand that almost all climate scientists have concluded that human-caused global warming is happening. That's a big deal. Why is it that they think so? Well, it's partly because the media portrays it as a 50-50 split, but also fewer than half of Americans hear about global warming in the media or from people they know at least once a month. If you're in the echo chamber, you don't hear about it. And that's why we need you as young, budding science communicators. You are the people who can help us break this machine, the climate change denial machine. Get people out of their echo chambers. Burst those bubbles. You're the people that we need. So I'm glad you're here today. Thank you so much for communicating science. If we have any more time left, I'm happy to answer questions. I got a thumbs up on that. If you don't get your question out today, my address is up there. You can certainly email me. But open up for questions. Oh, I see one. Hey. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, right. So you're the person who's in right. So that's not a denial of the science, right? That's a completely different concern, really. So if we're talking to not just one person, but if we're talking to a lot of people whose livelihood might depend upon a particular kind of industry that is not really sustainable under climate change models that we have now, right? Yeah, that's tough for those individuals. But what would you say to tobacco farmers or folks like that, right? Well, we know that your livelihood depends upon selling tobacco, so we're just going to ignore the science on that and tell everybody it's cool to smoke. I mean, it's kind of one of those kinds of things, right? So when you think about the economic kind of concerns here, you've got, the corporations making massive profits, and they are definitely vested in undermining the science. But then you've got people who work for them and people who work in those industries who, what are we going to do? What happens if the coal mine, shuts down and you've got a community that's built around it. Now, those are very, very difficult things to do. And so I think what we need to do is start putting a little bit more pressure on the corporations to do the training that's needed to move their own workforce into these new areas, where there actually is massive economic opportunity, right? So if we're thinking about the backfire effect being associated with politics and economics and things like that, if we are talking to capitalists, then instead of coming out and saying, hey, here's all the science on climate change, and you just said, you buy it, what are we going to do about it? That's hard, right? So if we can frame that in terms of an economic opportunity, hey, look, these other countries are getting ahead of us in all of these technologies that are going to help us get away from the climate change causing fossil fuel industry. Wouldn't we be better off to get ahead of that and be more economically competitive with those other countries and with those other companies that are going to outpace us if we don't get out ahead of them now, right? So it's this whole cost-benefit analysis that corporate America and these big industries are doing to say, at what point does it become 1 penny more profitable for us to change our model? And we can't really have that 1 penny more profitable kind of thing when we're talking about something like the health of everyone on our planet. So the same thing for the tobacco industry applies to other things where the public health is involved, right? I don't think anyone would argue that we should have said, well, the people who work in the tobacco industry, they really need this, so we're just going to go ahead and let people have cancer and die earlier and have bad health spans and get people addicted to these things because of the livelihood of the people who depend on that thing, right? That's not something that we as a country, as humanity, can really get behind, I think. So when we're looking at the science on something like climate change, or even vaccines, things like that, where we know that the public good lies in the direction that science is pointing us, it's really hard to then say, you know what, someone else needs to make money off of this thing, so the rest of humanity, sorry. I understand it's hard, right? So when I'm talking to someone whose very livelihood depends on this now, that's a lot harder to do than it is to think about what should we do as a society in general. As a society in general, very clear. How does it impact you? And we're going to have a much deeper talk about that. And I think that's where it's important to really think about, where are you coming from at it personally, so that you know that I'm not against you, but we've got this other thing that we really need to talk about that really impacts everyone else. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'd be happy to talk to you about these things. Yeah, okay. Yeah, over here. That's a good question. And I think the answer is you are probably the best position to do that. You've got a sympathy factor, right? You're a young person with a world ahead of you, right? And we don't want to leave things bad for you. Now, the worst thing we could do is say, we don't care, let you figure it out, right? But I do know something that was in my particular experience with the tobacco question, right? When I was growing up in Arkansas, most of my mom's side of the family were chain smokers and always had been as long as I knew that, right? But when I started learning about, the dangers of tobacco and things like that, I talked to people in my family and said, look, I care about you. This is hurting you. This is hurting me because I'm around the smoke that you exhale and that comes out the end of your cigarette. And enough of that got them to think, maybe I shouldn't be damaging the health of, my nephew, my grandkids, whatever, right? So that's the kind of thing where you're coming at it from something that they care about, and that's you, right? And your future, and their grandkids or whatever might happen after that, right? Just, thinking about you you are in a very good position to influence the people who care about you, right? So when we're thinking about how do we get people to change what they're doing, framing it in terms of responsibility for something that they care about is a very big thing, whether it's you or for the health of our, the economic situation of our country, right? Do you want these other countries to outpace us economically and be in a better position than we are? Or do you want to beat them to the punch and have them dependent upon this new technology that we generate, right? So these kinds of things that play into the things that you know that they care about are going to be much more effective than coming at them with information that they haven't really opened their ears to yet. Yeah. I see a bunch of hands up there. I have no idea who was first, and it's hard for me to see anybody. Somebody's wearing a lot of white. You're sticking out. Yes. You know what? That's actually why I went into what I went into. So for those who didn't hear, the question has to do with my background in an undergraduate institution where I earned a degree in biology and a minor in Bible. And part of that is because where I went to university, it was actually difficult to not get enough credits in Bible to have a minor. It was a requirement that you take a Bible class every semester at Harding University. I assume it still is. And so, you know, if you spend enough time there and enough semesters, then you end up with enough credits for a minor. I went there because my family was associated with the denomination that supported that particular university. And so it was really in line with what I had grown up with in my whole community, right? And when it came to things like, and you may be thinking about reconciliation with something like evolution, that was a very big important part. You know, I grew up in Arkansas, where if you know anything about the history of teaching evolution in the United States, maybe you've heard of the Scopes monkey trials from 1925. That was in order to test the legality of the constitutionality of a law that made it illegal to teach evolution in Tennessee, but the same laws made it illegal to teach evolution in Arkansas as well at the time. That was a big, huge public spectacle. And because of that, they didn't really touch it legally again. It didn't get overturned in the right way because of a legal technicality, and no one touched it again for 40 years. In the 60s, when it was Epperson v. Arkansas, that actually ended up being the big court case that was so contentious at the time that made it illegal to make it illegal to teach evolution. That was something that was in my parents' time, right? That was when they were in high school. And that's what they knew about evolution was everybody is talking about this thing and nobody agrees on it and everybody's upset about it. So they didn't want to talk about it in high school. Happened again in the 80s. It was McLean versus Arkansas, right as I was going into the public school system, and again in 1987 in Louisiana, right across our border, as I was going into high school era, right? So it was something that was big on everybody's radar, and no one wanted to touch it. So nobody talked about it, except for the anti-evolution evangelists that came and used the school on the weekends. And that was, you know, partly from my church. And so when I went to Harding University, they didn't talk about it until you get to be a senior and they have a course called the Christian View of Science and Scripture that everybody had to take as they were exiting, because they knew you were about to go to grad school, med school, wherever the next step is, into a scientific community that is entirely based on the underlying principle of biology, which is evolution. Trying to get you ready for that because we haven't really talked about it. And then when I went to grad school, that was the first class they wanted me to take was evolution. And it was scary. It was hard. And as I started learning more about evolution, all of the things that I had merely memorized in biology started to make a lot more sense. And for the first time, I was able to think about what might be the case, what might be the explanation, what might be going on here, because I started to understand the history of those systems and how that was important to how they got to be that way and how they're changing because of the way evolution works. And that was just radically liberating, also very scary for me, but it was very important to understand biology as something that had a structure and a framework to it that bound it together in an understandable way, right? So that was huge. And I also started feeling a little cheated. So I started trying to figure out, well, how can we talk about this in a way that allows people to understand the central concept in biology and have it be the guiding framework for their understanding, just the way it is in actual practice in biology, understanding that they're going to have some non-science conflict, perhaps. And that really shaped where I went. When I went to McGill for my PhD, it was with the Evolution Education Research Center, and that's really what I worked on. And I did my PhD research in Arkansas, working with people as they were changing their minds about evolution and incorporating that with their faith. So when we're talking about things like the backfire effect, the worldview backfire effect, evolution is one of those really big ones. So don't be a jerk, right, when you're talking to people about that. Understand what they think of as evidence, and give them people that affirm their worldview or think like they do religiously, who also accept evolution, and allow them to work that out, rather than trying to be a representative who may not necessarily be from the same background that they are. But giving them people like Francis Collins, for example, or other evangelical Christians, or letting them know if they're Catholic, you know, hey, this is what the Pope has to say about this, and you're really actually cool, theologically speaking, no problems, right? Or, you know, thinking about people from the same religious background who've made that reconciliation, gives them the space to do that in a comfortable place from their faith perspective without putting them in a crisis of faith. So yeah, that's definitely been very important in terms of getting me to where I am and what I do. That's a good question. Thank you. Right behind this. Oh, wait. Last question? Okay. I see a hand, and I don't know who it's attached to, but it's right over the head of the person who just asked the last one. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. None of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, that was actually kind of a lot of questions. I'm going to try to think about, you know, I think you got toward motivation, and a lot of it is profit based, right? So if you look at the players at the top of that climate change denial machine, it's the fossil fuel industry in corporate America, and it's really mostly about profit, right? So yeah, that's economic. But then there is that kind of political thing that goes into that. And it's kind of part of this really deeply divided political environment where we have this kind of polar opposition to each other. And it's not usually one thing that drives that, right? So you might be on one side of the political voting block or the other. And there's lots of issues where this whole block over here takes all of those things together. And if I depart from one of those things, then that's threatening to my identity at its core, right? So you might be dealing with something like climate change that's really politically tied to other kinds of things, like, you know, abortion or education rights, or, you know, any of these other things that might be kind of tied to that political platform. Departure from that is very difficult to do, as you see. You know, right now when we're talking about like the filibuster, we've got one person who can't break from the party, but also, you know, it's really difficult, right? You got to kind of stay in line and monitor where your power is going because of that. So, you know, I think maybe we need to get a little bit more open-minded in how we talk to each other about a lot of things, not just the one thing that we're talking about in terms of climate change. Yeah, same person, I think. Oh, okay. The hand is right about where it was before. Uh-huh. Oh my. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. That is fantastic. And it actually really gets to this over here, right? So if we can get together on what we need to do together and make sure we don't leave people behind, that really kind of solves some of these other economic issues too, right? Where we recognize that your industry is counter to the public health. So rather than leaving you in the cold, let's help you through that financially. Let's help you through that with training for a new line of work, those kinds of things. And I think that's definitely a way we need to be going publicly. But we can't really get there with the misinformation machine driving things for the status quo. Yeah, that's really hard. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a marketing issue too, and I think that the young folks here are going to be part of that solution as they kind of think about things for themselves and communicate up and amongst themselves about these things for the solutions that we need to just make it uncool to smoke like it is now, right? Everybody here was like, no way, I know better than that, right? So the Marlboro Man is not as cool as he used to be. And we see right through that Virginia Slim stuff in a way that we didn't used to. These young folks are smart. And, you know, the growing up in the technology era that they have, they've got really good nose for looking at something, misinformation, and knowing, you know, well, who's putting this out there and why. And they're really good at that. And they're also really good at that messaging. So I think as these young budding science communicators come on the scene, they're going to be very good at spreading that information and holding people accountable at the top in ways that maybe they hadn't before. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So as we begin the award ceremony, first I'm going to introduce the president of the Science Teachers Association of New York State, which is the organization that brings us all together here today. So with that, I will welcome Dr. Dominic Fantico here to say a few words.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm excited to be here to represent the Science Teachers Association. It's actually our 125th anniversary this year as an organization, and we're the oldest science educator professional organization in the country. So our mission really is to work with educators and communities to provide opportunities for all students to participate in and learn science. And, you know, this is the tail end of my year as president, and I'll hand over the reins on July 1st. And usually it's a really exciting opportunity to be president of STANYS because you get to travel all over the state, work with many teachers, work with many students, present in many places, travel to conferences all around the state, around the country. And this is the very first event I've done in person. So like many of you, this is an awesome opportunity. And I really want to thank Dr. Peter Plumley, Dr. Emily Stewart, and the staff at the MOST for hosting this day today. It really, there's a lot of work they've done behind the scenes to make this happen. And so can we give them a round of applause, please? They've done an amazing job. So I tried to walk around to visit as many of your presentations as possible. I didn't get to all of you, but I did get to most of you. And I think, you know, the theme that's been really important today to me is science communication. And I could see that in so many of the presentations that I visited today. And you're hitting some really hard and difficult topics that need to be discussed. And so I'm really excited about what you all hold for the future for science education. And, you know, my love of science, I went to undergrad as a biologist. I just finished up my PhD in science education. And my love of science started in high school, my biology teacher. And that was the main reason I wound up going to biology in college. And so probably for many of you, your first experience with science was a teacher. You may be pursuing a career in science because of teachers that you had in the past or still have currently. And so as you think to the future, there is a career opportunity in education. And there's so many levels of education you can explore. Certainly the K-12 education world. I currently reside in the higher ed world. I work at SUNY Cortland. And then there's informal education as well, like the Museum of Science and Technology here in Syracuse. So as you go forward in the future, there's so many opportunities for you to think about in science, and especially science education. And we really, really need some strong, quality, high-performing teachers in science. And so certainly consider that as an opportunity. And thank you for all the work you've all done to come here today, to present your work, and to show us what you all have to offer. And so I'm really excited. It's been a pleasure to hang out with you today, and look forward to the award ceremony. Thank you.
All right. Now to the part we've all been waiting for. Thanks, Dr. Fantacone. So now we begin the awards ceremony. A few notes just really quickly. Everyone today gets a souvenir pack, so we've got some special stuff in there, including a keychain that we designed and 3D printed for this year's conference. So there's one in each of the student bags, but there's lots left over, so parents, teachers, whoever wants one as a little memorial of our first event back of 2021, maybe. So you're welcome to grab some of those. I also want to let the students know that when you return to your projects, there will be judge feedback forms there for you. They do not have names attached to them, but they are written substantive feedback. So hopefully that helps you as you progress through your next stage of your projects. Okay. All right, so each division, so junior and senior, has the same awards. And it's 2 honorable mention positions, 2 honors positions, 2 high honors positions, and 2 highest honors positions. So we'll work through those for each of the divisions. We're going to start here with our junior division. Okay. So when you come up to receive your award, you'll also get a little slip. And that slip will be something that you need to fill out so that we can send you your award prizes and your checks, which STANYS provides for cash prizes for the winners. So you can take that form and return it to me or a most staff member as soon as you can before you leave. Also, when you come up to receive your award, you can kind of stand right here. I'll sort of shake your hand and give you your prize. And then you can look right at the camera because this, again, is being live streamed. So then when you want photos of this later, you can go watch the stream and screenshot. So you can have a little photo of your experience here and your big award win. So, all right, we are going to start with the junior division. And so, like I said there, honorable mention, typically we will do 2 honorable mention, 2 in each category, right? However, the number of junior division submissions were a little limited this year. So we're doing only 1 honorable mention. And the junior division honorable mention for this year is Genevieve McGuire Griffin with her butterfly journal project. All right, perfect. Big round of applause for Genevieve. Thank you. It's time for the event. All right. So we begin with the honors. Like I said, there's honors, high honors, and highest honors. So 2 in each category for this junior division. So in our honors position, this year we have Ava Airsock and Eli Burrito Balloon. Ava is a virtual, so we can all clap for her. Congratulations, Eli. Thank you. And Ava too at home. All right. In our high honors position, we have Kiva Dungeon and Samuel Dixon from Greenwich Middle School. So thank you. Okay, perfect. Congratulations, guys. Okay, and in the highest honors category for our junior division, congratulations, Amatis Vazzelli and Manya Kukar. Come on up and grab your prizes. Really great projects this year. Did you walk over? You made it. Perfect. You can see where you're Hello, virtual viewers. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So now we move on to the senior division. This is the high school division. Again, it's the same structure. So we've got 2 honorable mention, 2 honors, 2 high honors, 2 highest honors. So in our honorable mention position, congratulations to Carolyn Brown of Williamsville North High School and Luke Briotti of Byram Hills High School, who I believe are both virtual. So I hope you all can hear us at home clapping. Congratulations. Perfect. All right. And in the honors position in the senior division, congratulations to Andrea Murziano and Jaden Dugal. Congratulations, guys. Good job. Great work. All right. And finally, our highest honors positions in the senior division. Congratulations to Elias Steele, Emlyn Junger, and Emlyn Junger. Sorry, I don't know. To Elias Steele and Emlyn Junger. Congratulations, ladies. Thank you. All right, so this is highest honors. I'm sorry I misspoke earlier. This is the final 2 awards, our highest honors in the senior division. Again, every project, just for being here today, is fantastic. You qualified to be here, and that means that your project already is among the premier projects in New York State. So obviously a round of applause to everyone today. But our highest honors for senior division, Ava Herzog and Colleen Koknem, Rowan Menon, and Jacob Yanov. Congratulations. Over so y'all can get in. Perfect. There it is. Now we can say hello to our virtual viewers. Good job. Congratulations, guys. Congratulations to all the winners. So again, winners, as you walk out here, you also get a prize tag, just like all the participants. And winners should specifically grab this form to fill out so we know where to send the rest of your prizes. So last but not least, we have a few more things on the agenda. In addition to our campus tour, so there's an opportunity for everyone to join us starting, the bus will depart at 2:30. It's going to head up to Syracuse University for a little tour of the campus and of Link Hall, which is the Engineering and Computer Science department. So that's a complimentary tour. The shuttle is provided for you as part of your attendance here today. And Peter's going to give a rousing tour of the department. So I encourage everyone to take advantage of that opportunity. And last but not least, before we leave, I would like to welcome someone with many years of science communication and science fair experience, who serves as the director of the Central New York Science and Engineering Fair, as well as today's Congress. He's a professor in the Engineering and Computer Science department at Syracuse University, as well as serving in a number of critical roles here at the MOST, including as my mentor. So with a few comments to send you off, let's welcome Dr. Peter Plumlee.
Thank you, Emily. I want to reiterate the thanks that Dominic spoke about. The fact of Emily's crew here, the staff, the technicians, the technology people, fantastic job. Let's give them a round of a hand. So Science Congress is probably the most cerebral event the MOST is engaged in. Just going around every year when we look at these projects, you guys are firing on a whole new level, and they're much higher than anybody else. It's really a fantastic event. It's great to see you guys doing this. We do other things, but this is the peak. So you can look forward to Science Congress 2022 here. It's going to be the second Saturday in June. Again, that's our timing for this event, and we're going to keep trying to improve it, make it even better. Next year, we may even have a dinner that goes with the award ceremony at the evening that Syracuse University may host for us. So we're on constant improvement. And like Emily said, we're going to adjourn now and pick up your stuff and get ready. For those of you who are going to join me on the bus, going out for a tour of College of Engineering, we've got some engineering undergraduates up there who will speak to you about their experiences. And we'll have a chance to look in the building and what people do. So again, thank you very much for coming and appreciate it. We can do a group picture.
Yeah, we can. All right, so with that, our program for today in this theater is finished. We'd like to have all the winners come up, and we're going to get a little group photo here, and you guys can also grab your forms to fill out. So we'll have all the winners come up, and like I said, everyone gets a little prize pack here. So congratulations again to everyone.